This is the story of how I ended up with a motorcycle dyno to use for electric bikes. I'm gonna tell you how I got it, what I had to do to make it work, how it works, and I'm gonna do a dyno test on this Blackbird. Now, I have wanted a dyno to test electric bikes for years. I actually reached out to a few different companies. I tried to get some quotes for models that I thought might work. I was thinking some sort of scooter dyno or a motorcycle dyno. My concerns were, can it work at those very low power levels when it's ideally people wanting to measure really high power levels? But what it really came down to that prevented me from doing this was cost. I talked to one company, I think they gave me a quote of around like $19,000 or something. But when I told them what I wanted to do as far as testing it specifically for electric bikes, for some reason I remember the quote doubling to almost $40,000, and I put that on hold for obvious reasons. As useful as I think this was gonna be, I just could never justify that kind of money for it. So fast forward to about a month ago, I'm thinking about this again. So I go onto Google, I type in motorcycle dyno for sale, and to my luck, there was an auction going on. It had 2 days left, and it was for this very dyno. This one was originally manufactured in 1995 by Dynojet. It's a Dynojet model 150, and they say it can measure up to about 500 horsepower. But the auction I was looking at had hardly any bids on it. I think it was at like $5 when I found it. So I thought, well, this could possibly go really cheap. The listing did say the computer has a problem and may need to be replaced. I know a thing or two about computers, so I wasn't too worried about that, but I literally knew nothing about how to repair a dyno, operate a dyno. The machine was clearly old. There was a picture with this machine and basically a pile of wires, computer disks, and a computer, and I decided to take a risk. Like any auction, it did get bid up in the last day, and especially in the last like 5 minutes, but I put in a bid that I was hoping and crossing my fingers would be enough to nab it. I won the auction. Then I had to figure out how to get it from Washington down to California, and it's here. I put out a short videos of fiddling with it and messing with it because it didn't work when it showed up. This is the computer running Windows XP. The software that came with this was actually still running on DOS, if you can believe that. And I called Dynojet when I actually got it physically here. I gave them the serial number and I asked some questions about what even model is this? What is it capable of? Can it even measure these low horsepower numbers and torque numbers that I'm looking for? And they were extremely helpful. They walked me through how I could plug everything in and see if the thing would even work. And they told me some of those numbers, like yes, it can measure up to 500 horsepower. If the hardware is functioning, you could potentially measure down to like 1/10 of a horsepower, which is perfect. 1/10 of a horsepower, that's like less than 100 watts. So at that point, I was excited that maybe I can actually get this thing to work. The computer, unfortunately, didn't even boot up. I couldn't even get into the BIOS. It was completely dead. And then the hardware that came with the machine, that is this bin of random wires and cables and things. There is one critical component in here, the stack as they call it. And this interfaces with the computer and does several different things. You can plug in an air to fuel ratio, there's an exhaust temperature, something for spark plugs, all sorts of stuff that you would use for a combustion engine, but not necessarily needed for what I want to do. Now, basically, if I turned this box on and I got all green lights and a flashing yellow, that means it works. And then if I can find a new old computer with a serial port or modify a new computer to have a serial port, then maybe it would work. Unfortunately, I turned this thing on and it did not. And those are old enough, of course, that they are no longer repaired. There is a chance that if I replace the battery in that unit that's internal, maybe it would work. And maybe I could get an old computer, and maybe I could run that old DOS program to get some basic information. If it didn't, I was told by Dynojet that thankfully, this is not a giant paperweight. I could spend another $2,500, upgrade to new equipment, and it would be running on their latest hardware and software. That was a little more money than I wanted to spend on top of what I'd already paid for the dyno and the shipping here. In the meantime, I started researching this type of dyno so I could understand how it worked, and I came across something called Your Dyno, and it's more suited to modifying existing dynos or even making your own DIY dyno work. The hardware for that, instead of $2,500, I was gonna be under $1,000 to be running on modern equipment, modern software that is upgradable for extra functions, extra features if I think of other things I want to test on this. So it took a few little modifications, but I decided to bite the bullet on the Your Dyno setup instead, simply due to cost. Nothing against Dynojet at all. They were very, very nice at talking to me. It's simply a matter of trying to stay within a reasonable budget. As an example, they were talking about adding a speed sensor onto the rear wheel, or say if I wanted to add a speed sensor onto a mid-drive motor somewhere and get actual engine torque or engine RPM and do calculations like that, a speed sensor was gonna be like $450. A speed sensor from Your Dyno was like 75 bucks. Cost-wise, it just seemed like this was the smart way to go. I wish I would have done this sooner, but I'm glad it's here now and I'm glad it's working. But I'll give you just a quick rundown. So obviously, you stick the bike on the top here. There is a roller here in the back. And when that rear wheel spins, it's rolling that really heavy drum. I felt like there was a little bit too much resistance in this main roller, and my suspicion was it was just being caused by this brake. It's old, it's rusty, it needs some obvious cleaning and a brake bleed. So I popped the brake off just to confirm, and this thing spins so easily now. It's actually insane how long it spins from just a tiny little push. So that brake was robbing horsepower, watts, torque. Now if I have bikes of different lengths, this front portion moves forward and backwards. It's on a track. The handle was busted, but no problem. I just 3D printed a new one, so good to go there. This lever right here is a brake. So you step on that to slow the drum down. And hidden under this diamond plate, some of the new hardware that I installed, the speed sensor is mounted to the shaft of the drum. So I had to drill a hole and tap it for a new sensor that's mounted on there. This is the little Your Dyno box. This is kind of the brains of the operation. And that's just plugged into the computer. Now there is one more component which I don't really need to use for what I'm doing, and that is a starter motor. So under this guy right here, there is basically an old General Motors starter motor for an engine, and there's a handheld button right here. And if I press that, that will actually spool that drum up. But from the little bit that I've tested, that doesn't seem to be necessary. That runs off of a 12-volt car battery that you put inside the dyno here. So I've just left that disconnected for right now. So problem number one was the computer, which didn't work. Problem number two, I had to buy some new hardware, get it installed. Thankfully that went easier than expected and is all working great. Problem number three that I ran into was the brake. So I want to explain how this works to kind of answer your guys' questions on what can I actually measure with this. This is an inertia dyno. So the way this works is that this drum has a very specific mass and what they call moment of inertia. So I plug in the moment of inertia of that specific drum into the dyno software, and then it can calculate just based on the RPM of how quickly that drum spins up, how much torque and how much horsepower the motor on the bike can produce, which I'm measuring in watts electric bikes are pretty much always rated in watts. We don't really look at horsepower. I don't remember the exact number, but 1 horsepower is roughly 750 watts. So it's very easy to convert if you wanted to see it the other way. And then the other thing it can measure is the torque. Now the software can give me the torque number in either Newton meters, which is what most bike companies are listing on their website, or foot-pounds. That is also just a direct conversion. You can plug that into a calculator to get one or the other. Now I was initially going to run every test in Newton meters, but I'm gonna have to do a conversion instead. I'm gonna measure everything in foot-pounds. And the reason for doing that is because I have the RPM of the drum, and because I know the surface speed of the drum, I can plug that into the computer and I can get the speed of the rear wheel. So I can have the horsepower or the watts, I can have the torque, I can have the miles per hour and the speed all on that same type of chart. And unfortunately, you can't set the units for each individual thing. You either have to pick imperial or metric. So if I changed it to Newton meters, then the screen would also be reading in kilometers an hour, but I wanted to use miles per hour, so we're having to use foot-pounds. So I'm happy to do some conversions to Newton meters if you want to compare it to actual motor specs. But just so you know, that's what we'll be looking at. And really, I can stick anything on the dyno that can spin that rear drum. So it could be a rear-wheel drive bike with a hub motor. It could be a mid-drive bike that's turning the rear wheel. It doesn't matter. It doesn't know what is moving the drum. I could put an electric skateboard on there. I could put a scooter on there. I can put a combustion engine motorcycle, an electric motorcycle. You could even sit on the bike and pedal and just see how much horsepower you can produce, which I think would actually be kind of interesting. So in the future, I can test things like a stock bike and then put a new motor controller on it and then test that bike with the motor controller upgrade and see how much power did that add, how much torque did that add, did it add any appreciable speed or none at all. Now speaking about speed, one thing I need to point out is that the speeds that are gonna read on this are always going to be higher on the top end than what you could get in real life. The reason being, there is no wind resistance. This dyno is really just measuring power of the motor. It's not taking account into the rider weight. It's not taking account into wind resistance. No external factors like that. Now it is going to account for the rear tire. So if we're getting losses and the rear tire's not very efficient, either due to tire pressure or maybe the width of the tire or the tire tread, those are things that are measurable. So if I changed this to a street tire, I could see how much power did that give us, or how much did we lose by going to a fatter tread. I could put a mountain bike tire or a street tire and see how much more power does that give me? How much faster does that make it go? Those are things that I can test. So I've been making a list of things I want to test, which includes what bikes I want to put on here, what controller upgrades I want to put on here. I can test things like a parallel battery connector. In theory, the voltage drop should be less. Less voltage drop means more watts. Do we actually see that at the rear wheel? In theory, we might, but how much? I don't know. So behind me, I have mounted a few things to the wall here, specifically for dyno testing. The big one is this whiteboard, which is currently empty. The Blackbird step through is gonna be the very first bike to go on the whiteboard. What I wanna do is write down the max watts and the max torque for every single bike that is tested and rank them on this whiteboard. So you can see the results compared to a bunch of different bikes and see which bikes or upgraded bikes are the fastest, have the most torque. And I think that's gonna be really interesting. I think we're gonna find bikes that are under-spec'd quite often. I think occasionally we're gonna find a bike that's more powerful than it's advertised. Although rare, I'm very confident that's actually gonna happen. So I need to set some ground rules to make the playing field fair and level for every single bike. I may test the bike in the stock as shipped configuration. So these we ship quoting them as a 750 watt bike. I'll probably do a run at that just to see how it registers. But then what I really want to do for putting on the board is the unlocked maximum power. What can this actually do? And that's going to be done on a full battery charge. So I've just charged this bike up. It's sitting at the max of 58 volts because this is a 52 volt nominal battery. And I'm also going to put the rear tire pressure to whatever the maximum recommended amount is on the sidewall. And that's really about it for a bike with a hub motor. I don't want to change tires. I don't want to fiddle with any other settings because I want to see what does the bike produce as it comes from the manufacturer and stock. So that's going to be one category where we measure and test bikes. And then I'll probably have a second category for the modified and aftermarket stuff. So this tire feels like it's probably not up to the max. So I'm gonna pump that up a little bit and then let's do a dyno run. But real quick before that, I owe you an update on our new retail space. It's been a long time since I've said anything about that. And that's because it's been a long time since I've actually been to the shop. Originally, I was hoping that would be open this spring. We're obviously into fall already and we're still not moved in. But I went there a couple days ago and I got an update on how everything is going. Everything is looking really good.
We just got it running today. They're 36,000 BTUs each.
They're obviously working because it's cool in here.
So the other thing we're waiting on is we haven't passed the fire inspection because we put one more strobe over here. The door's new. There's a exit here with a walk path that we put in. That was required.
Oh yeah.
So
Fancy.
yeah.
New concrete. Look at all the outlets. That's
Lots
good.
of outlets. Yeah.
We need those.
ADA bathroom. It was supposed to originally toilet over here, door over here, but we ran into a problem because
There was like a pillar or something.
yeah, right here. This is the old pier or pillar. Lots of lighting, very bright.
We got 200 amps. That's plenty. Oh, ours is gonna be like purple.
It's purple?
Yeah. I sent you the pictures,
I want to see it.
the proofs of it.
Yeah.
This was the drawing of it.
Oh dang, that's gonna look good.
Yeah.
They came up with the little bike thing.
How are they
Isn't
gonna?
that cool?
How are they gonna? Oh, okay, so it's all. So it's 1, 2, 3 pieces.
Storage in the back here. And then all of this space is retail. So gonna have in the far corner is gonna be our retail checkout area. On the wall here, that's where we're gonna have helmets, bike racks, bike tubes, all sorts of accessories. So we've already ordered a new Area 13 light up sign. It's not on the building yet. We're just waiting for the permit so that can be installed. Come in through the front door here. The delays really are all just down to construction lead times as well as permit lead times. So although there have been a lot of delays, that is absolutely 100% still happening. That's gonna be our new permanent location. As soon as basically everything is signed off, we're gonna start moving into that shop. So we met with Jim, the owner of the building. He's overseeing everything that's being done to see where things are at. But let's get to what you're really waiting for, which is the dyno test. Okay, so we can see the power in kilowatts in real time. We can see the foot-pounds of torque in real time, the speed in miles per hour in real time, and also the RPM. That's the RPM, again, of the drum itself. So we're just gonna go manual start. It is now logging everything that's happening from this point. So I'm gonna turn the power on the bike down to the out of the box setting, which we say is 750 watts. I've never done this before. Let's see what we get. Actually reading just over 1,000 watts. On the display and on the computer, they're really closely matched. I'm actually surprised about how close they are. The speed is reading about the same. I'm gonna run up to max speed until it doesn't accelerate anymore, so we get a full run through the whole power range. I think that's about it. Now use the brake. Slow that drum down. See what we got. So we can do a stop, and we can see that on the stock settings, which I always assumed was 750 watts, we actually got a max of 1.038 kilowatts. So that's 1,038 watts at 376 RPM, and we got 27.84 foot-pounds of torque. So let's crank the bike up to the max power and see what it does. A theoretical maximum of 1,300 watts. Let's see how close we actually get to that number. I was expecting, I suppose, more of a loss due to inefficiencies in the motor controller and the motor, but I got 1.287 kilowatts, so just a hair under the theoretical peak of 1,300 watts at 423 RPM and a max of 32.9 foot-pounds at 237 RPM. Now, I'm curious, I know people are gonna wonder, how does that compare to the spec of the motor? So this is a Bafang 750 watt motor that from the manufacturer is rated at 80 Newton meters of torque. Now, I believe that torque measurement is probably at the axle. And I say that because they fit that motor into 20-inch wheels, 24-inch wheels, 26-inch wheels, 29-inch wheels, and the torque would be different between all those different wheel diameters. So it's gotta be an axle number. But let's just see what 32.97 foot-pounds is in Newton meters. All right, so that is 44.7 Newton meters of torque. So how does that fare compared to other bikes, other brands, other motors? I have no idea. This is the baseline. This is bike number one. So let's see what the chart looks like on the computer. So I'm gonna hide the first run. This is the second run at max power. You can see the purple line is the torque and the blue line is the watts. So right off the bat, we can see the torque climbs very, very quickly, and you get the most torque early on, and then once the motor gets up to speed, basically you start losing torque all the way down until you basically have almost no torque left. Now I assume when we do a mid-drive test, this chart is going to look a little bit different. What I've seen on combustion engine, cars, bikes, things like that, that have a transmission, what you're doing is running it up the power, shifting gears, running it up again, and you're trying to get to wherever that peak performance is. That'll be a little bit of trial and error. These hub motor bikes are gonna be much simpler to test. And then the watts, we can see ramped up really nicely, and it looks like our peak was right here. Yeah, 1.29 kilowatts, just barely under that 1300 watt number. And the wattage stays fairly steady until later in the run. And at some point you can see basically when we get up to max RPM of the motor, then it starts to drop off quite rapidly at that point. Now I do also have built into this system ambient temperature, humidity. So I have the environmental conditions in case that matters. I don't think with electric components it's gonna make much of a difference at all for these short runs like this, but at least we have that data. So right now it's about 78 degrees and 44% humidity. Like I said, I don't think it'll make a difference, but I can always test this on a really cold day or on a really hot day and just see if there's any change. Maybe it will change the chemistry of the battery a little bit, and that will make a difference. So the Blackbird step through is 1.29 kilowatts max power at 423 RPM, which I could do the math and see how many miles per hour that actually was at peak power. And then 32.97 foot-pounds at 237 RPM. So that's our baseline benchmark test. If you have any questions about this, please ask in the comments. If you have any suggestions on how I can make these tests better or what sort of tests I can run, please let me know. There are so many things I think we can do with this. I'm certain there are gonna be some surprises. So make sure to hit that subscribe button if you wanna see the next dyno test. I've got more things lined up really soon.